Thank you for joining us today. The goal is to stay up to date in real estate. So I'm here today. My name is Juliet Kulda. I'm here with Judy Maddow-Sams today, and we're gonna go into the NAR, the National Association Realtor Settlement. And keeping in mind, there's still a lot of time to unravel this, but we're gonna at least talk about what we do know today.
Right. And reminder, we're not lawyers, right? That's our disclaimer. So we'll let you know what we know as of this point in time. There's still a little additional details coming forward, but we're opening up the conversation today with what we do know.
So they're the largest trade association in the United States, representing over 1.5 million real estate professionals nationally. The primary purpose of NAR is to advocate for the interests of its members, which include agents, brokers, and other industry stakeholders.
So the lawsuit, basically, it was NAR versus the U.S. Department of Justice. And in this settlement, this settlement was an antitrust lawsuit that was alleging that NAR had certain policies, which meant that we were being anti-competitive and limiting consumer choice. And it came down to, are we price fixing or keeping the prices elevated and high? And do we have complete transparency into how realtors are paid?
Try to break it down a little bit into what this looks like in real life. So the settlement aims to address these concerns by modifying NAR's regulations, such as eliminating requirements for upfront compensation to buyer's agents. So that basically saying, hey, I'll pay the buyer agent 2.5% or 3%. They're trying to basically eliminate that through the multiple listing. We'll talk about that. And prohibit blanket offers of cooperative compensation by the seller representative. So we now, all over our multiple listing service, we say, hey, this seller's willing to pay 3%. This seller's willing to pay 2.5%. So it's prohibiting basically just this sort of blanket, hey, this is what we pay, this is what it has to be to the buyer agent.
On the MLS. Yeah.
And using the multiple listing service to advertise that.
Right.
These changes are intended to enhance transparency and flexibility in real estate transactions, ultimately benefiting both clients and real estate professionals. We touched on that a minute ago.
Right.
And the ruling takes effect in July, mid-July. We're still kind of, again, unraveling a lot of the results and the effects and how this is going to look.
Yeah, so we touched on this because it really comes down to 3 to 4 things. The details of the summary. Number one, it removes this requirement for upfront compensation for the buyer's agent, as you said. So it won't be, and there's 3% to whoever brings the buyer. Number two, it eliminates our advertising that on the MLS platform. Number three, it requires agents to have buyer broker agreements written, signed before showing properties. So that's always been a good practice, but now it will be mandatory. Before showing you a property, got to have it.
So buyer agents, just like selling, listing, we have listing agreements. I'm not going to go take photos and put your house on the market and put our signs out and start representing you unless you sign a listing agreement with me, with us. Same with buyers now. It might seem like a new practice. You're going to find that this is actually something that's not so new.
That buyer representation agreement that they've signed before looking at houses must clearly disclose the compensation, either a dollar amount or percentage, so then how it's determined.
So these buyer rep agreements
must have the compensation.
Which will probably be a typical 2.5% is what we're probably going to see expected.
So if you're a home buyer, Juliet, how is that going to affect you as a buyer?
This is what this looks like. So let's say we meet you at open house, you're out shopping, you were not committed to a buyer agent yet. Then you say, hey, I want to go see 3 other ones this week. Well, look, the best next step is to get into a buyer consultation. Let's sit down, let's go through your wants, your needs, make sure you're ready for the market out there and what it looks like working with our team. And we want you to win and make sure you're pre-approved and all of that good stuff. And then we ask for this commitment to work together. Now, ideally, this might look like 1 year. It also might be, hey, we're not quite ready to make that full commitment. We're still interviewing agents, or hey, we're not sure what area we're going to be in. So then we might write out the 3 properties and say, look, Judy, this week, let's just start with the 3 properties we're going to go see tomorrow. Not so different than what we used to do during COVID when we had to do the entry forms. And I had to write down every address I was going to show you. So that buyer broker agreement looks in 2 different ways, more of a longer term commitment, which is usually the best way to go. Or maybe we start with just the house, but we can't go open the door and get you in that house until you sign that you're working with me. And by the way, See this, buyer agrees to pay the broker as follows.
Mhm.
We're going to be expecting a 2.5%, Judy, when we do find you that house. Now, we'll talk in a minute what that might look like if the seller isn't offering that, okay?
Right.
But I am going to need you to come up with that money if the seller isn't going to offer it. So
Right.
it's very clear that
That's how much
we're
I
going-
pay.
So this is mandatory. This is now, as of February 1st, Keller Williams Realty, our huge brokerage, required this for every buyer agreement. Okay.
Right.
So this is where we're headed. This is where we're going to be solidified, I think, in July, that we're going to see this across the whole country.
Yep.
Okay, for our sellers out there. So you're probably thinking, great, I just saved a bunch of money by this lawsuit. Well, we'll talk about that. Let's unravel it a little bit. It eliminates policies for setting agent commissions.
Mhm.
It prohibits blanket offers of cooperative compensation. And it prohibits advertising through the multiple listing, what you're going to give.
But sellers are allowed to negotiate buyer agent compensation outside of the MLS platform to offer what you'll talk about a little bit more, concessions to cover closing costs, to cover the buyer agent commission.
So we're going to have to slow down and talk about this. So I first said, well, if you'll notice on our page 1 of our listing agreement, it already says that this is all commissions are negotiable. We have that in California. We're a little ahead of the game. Maybe not all states are so clear to disclose right on front that this is completely, all commissions are negotiable on both sides. But I would say, look, I charge as your listing agent 3%, 2.5% for our services. But now all we need to decide, how much are you willing to offer an agent that's going to represent a buyer? I'd really recommend, would you consider a concession to offer to the buyer? Now, that concession would be great if it was 3%, because you'll really stand out. If 2.5% would still be just great. It could be less than that. But if you offer a concession to a buyer, they then have some concession money, which they're probably going to use to fulfill a contractual obligation they have to their buyer agent.
What if I just say no money to the buyer?
You absolutely do not have to. Compensation, is it really changed? Real estate commissions are and always have been fully negotiable. Whether we did a good job in our industry communicating, that's another story.
Right.
What's really changed here?
So what's changed and what's not, right? The one thing that is really changing is that sellers, if they're going to be offering that, they have to do it off of the MLS. And then the other, that's the change in compensation. The other one is just getting these agreements signed.
But this seller concession, sellers out there, if you're willing to pay, let's say 2.5%, and this is where it could get interesting. Maybe you offer 3% as the seller concession. You can't go back on that. You have to offer it to that buyer. The buyer might only be in contract on a buyer broker agreement for 2%. That extra 1% still gets paid because you already offered the concession, but it's going to go to the actual buyer's pocket. It's going to go to pay their closing costs. It's going to help our lenders. Michael Haig's on here is talking a lot about the buy downs on the rates. So this concession that a seller is going to be willing to pay, I think, is going to go a long way for a successful sale. Okay, so a little supporting data as to what we're talking about and what's happening out there.
Right? Of
86%.
all of their buyers are working with and acquiring their properties through real estate agents.
Yeah, and in the Bay Area, we might even see, these are national numbers, but most of our buyers, if they're not represented, they're going to get representation. This is a huge purchase. Our average price point on San Mateo County is about 1.8. So it would be surprising to make that big of a purchase without some kind of representation.
Yes.
So we're seeing I'd say a good solid 90%. So if you do not offer any kind of concession, then it may affect, and most likely will affect, the buyer pool. And we have an algorithm here at our team. We've been studying on average what each additional offer will bring you on your bottom line. And so we find that on average, each additional offer in multiple offer situations will bring you around 2.5% to your bottom line. So if your house is 1 million and you offer, let's say the 2 offers come in, then that's probably going to be 2.5% is 25,000. So if I get 2 extra offers, I would expect to go to about $1,050,000. 4 extra offers, our buyer agents out there are probably going to encourage our buyer to come in around $100,000 above a 1 million price point with 4 competing buyers. And if it's 6, we're probably going to get you in the ballpark of 1.15. So those are numbers that are not guaranteed, but these are algorithms that we've been studying within our team because we've sold a lot of homes the last few years in these multiple offer situations. So we started studying it. So it would, I think, be very beneficial to our sellers to offer this concession, because I think it will more than make up its money on your bottom line, because now we're opening up the buyer pool.
Right.
As a matter of fact,
So
maybe
more
offer
competition.
3%. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the buyer gets a little extra money in their pocket. So representation, now you might say, well, that's so new, but yet if you really look, this is statistically how many buyers already use this past year nationally, a buyer broker rep agreement written.
Right.
So already a third of the buyers out there have been signing them. Most of our buyers at Kulda Group sign them.
Plus another 18% said, well, yes, I at least had an oral agreement. So more than 50%, this is what,
We had
54?
a buyer
more than
agreement.
50%, of our buyers were already represented by an agent.
Yeah, and some didn't even know for sure if they had official
Right.
agreement. So the bottom line is already half the buyers are committed to working, and we're some of them, a lot of them written. We're going to get this to 100% in our industry, that we have agreements ahead of time.
Right.
And buyers out there and realtors, we're going to have a higher level of responsibility to do a really good job, because they're now committing to work with us alone.
That's right.
So that's going to be very, very important moving forward as well. How agents were compensated. In reality, there's not a whole lot of change. You know, half the time they were already paid by the seller, but sometimes the seller buyers kicked in a little bit to add to the price to give some money back to the buyer agent. And there's 28% across the country were actually paid by the buyers, because not so much in the Bay Area, but across the country, sometimes the buyers agents were paid.
That was a
directly
surprise
from
to me to learn that
buyer.
about a third of our buyers were already paying some portion of the commission.
Yeah.
So.
And this is just a little more backup on, you know, why I would recommend to offer this concession to the real estate agent, because this is where 28% of the buyers found out from their agent sending them that listing, or calling them and saying, you have to go look at this. I was on broker tour today. And then another 50% start online, but end up with an agent as well. So again, most of our buyers are coming through the agents.
So if I say, I really just don't think I want to pay a buyer's agent commission.
Okay.
What sorts of things might I expect, either from the buyers that are going to be writing the offers, or the final
Okay,
price?
so that's fair. You know, we're making it really clear now. You don't need to offer anything. So let's just go with our 2.5, the list side. So yeah, I understand you don't want to offer any kind of concession to the buyer agent, correct? Okay, no problem. So when I mentioned your house was worth 1 million, I was comparing it to all of the homes in the neighborhood that averaged 1 million. But the thing is, they were all the last 6 months from January to now July, where we're at now with this new ruling. Those all paid 5%. So now instead of $1 million, I'm going to be asking $975 for your house. So you're going to be getting a little less, because appraisal, apples to apples, those were all added in that 5% in that sale price. So again, everywhere, you guys, if hopefully you're hearing, every time we break this down, we bump up against really the same way we've been doing it, but in a little bit of more transparency and with more options. And by the way, lenders on the call, we've talked about this as well. We believe that this concession offered will also be something that could be built into the loan to help. There's questions about the loan, so I want to be careful how I say this. When you offer the seller credit, so if you don't offer the seller credit, let me finish this conversation. Judy seller, I know you don't want to offer the credit, but I want to give you a heads up. I first want to bring down your price to $975 in fairness, okay? And then I would like to let you know, when the offer comes in at $975, it's probably going to say something like this, because we have an additional form, everybody, that's now going to have the buyer's agents need to bring to the seller. And it's going to look along these lines. Seller to credit, Judy seller to credit the buyer X amount, maybe 2.5% at close of escrow, to satisfy the buyer's contractual agreement with the buyer's broker.
So you mean I still might have to pay them, even though I've said I don't want to? I may get offers that
if you want to accept that offer, it's going to be part of the agreement. So again, they're going to ask you, the agents are going to ask you to pay. And now we're at 975, we're back up to that million again, when you do the math. Now you don't have to take it. And then we're going to have another issue is, can that buyer move forward with the purchase? Because they may be tight on their 20% or 10% down payment, whatever it is. And they might not have another $25,000 to pay the buyer agent, buyer broker. We don't believe it's allowed to be wrapped up into the loan. But the seller can offer a concession to the buyer that could be used for some compensation for down payment or things like that.
And that's where we will be working very, very closely with our lending partners, because each different loan product has different restrictions as to how much they can have from a contributing party. So
Yep.
that's where we would structure that very carefully with our lending partner, so that we can be clear on this concession, how does it get utilized by the buyer to go towards the closing costs and the cooperating compensation.
Yeah. What do sellers want from their agent? That research across the country, that what sellers really want from their agent. They want the right pricing, because they know that's where the good value is going to come in, the right marketing, and help sell within the right time frame. So the value that we provide as a listing agent to the sellers is there, and buyers want from their agent. The most important thing is finding the right home. And that's why 90% of the buyers are going to be working with the agent. And by the way, guys, if they come in and they come unrepresented, so they're not working with an agent, guess what they're going to want to do to the price? They're going to want a discount.
Right.
They're going to want 25,000 back in their pocket for doing all their own research, but now they're unrepresented. We do find that the sellers are happy. They, when you add the first two graphs from, I would definitely use my agent again, or probably we're getting 90% across the country that, people are still using listing agents. They are still using buyer agents. They see it as a good, solid financial investment. Our Michael Haig is on here, guaranteed rate. We'd love to hear from you, Michael, if you have any more information on how this might affect being wrapped into loans or seller concessions and things like that.
We're asking the question, if there's a way to structure the buyer's commission that they've contractually obligated through the buyer broker agreement, can we factor that in as part of the overall loan scenario? So we've allowed for credits, we've allowed from different sources, still waiting on the answer just to make sure that could be completely included.
So this is the seller concession is what we're going to be recommending. Is, I think if you get that point, is I'm going to be going in with our sellers saying, I highly recommend we still build in a concession. You absolutely don't need to, but if you don't build this in, I do believe it's going to affect the buyer's ability to purchase this home. And the more buyers we bring you more money on your bottom line as well. Right. It has to have the payment needs to come from somewhere. And if the buyer's going out of pocket, then they're going to also be wanting to discount your price when they buy your house.
And that's great advice for sellers. And we would still offer the advice for buyers is, you have a choice. You need to be interviewing your agents and make sure that you understand the services that they're offering and the value that they're able to bring to you when you sign on to work with them. And that's one of the reasons that I would feel confident signing on, at least like with our buyer agents, for example. They've got years of experience. This is my most important real estate
There's
investment.
a lot that goes into the
and
sale.
What I'm looking for from your slides is I need somebody with experience and somebody who can negotiate the right price for me to find the right home.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And I would highly recommend, until we know for sure, you've got to be completely 100% underwritten on your pre-approval, and do it early.
Yeah. And just as a general little, what's going on in the market, if a house is priced well, or any property, vacant land, commercial, anything, we're seeing multiple offers across the board on all well-priced properties, and sometimes very shocking multiple offer situations with what buyers are willing to do. If they're not priced right, buyers can figure it out pretty quickly, and then they sit, and then we have to reduce. So it's an interesting market. It's definitely kicking in this spring. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. We've been down 42% in San Mateo County and all of the nearby counties in the amount of home sales. This is another added twist, but I really don't see a lot of changes in how we do our business coming from this, the results of this lawsuit. I see it being, yeah, there's going to be challenges and changes. Documents will need to change, but we're starting. I think it will ultimately be very good for the consumer,
yes,
for our customers, and for the agents, and for the industry as a whole. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. It's the last Wednesday of every month right here at noon. We're happy to have you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.